I came to fix a broken door handle. But she trapped me in a moment I couldn't escape, or didn't want to. He hadn't expected much when he agreed to come by. A simple repair job, a broken door handle. Yet, as he stepped onto the worn wooden steps of her home, he felt a faint ripple of anticipation he couldn't explain. The house itself had a quiet charm, a warmth that spoke of careful living. Soft sunlight spilling across the faded rug, potted plants perched near the window, a faint scent of lavender and something richer, muskier, that lingered in the air. She appeared from the hallway just as he was unpacking his tools. In her early 40s, she moved with a quiet confidence that immediately drew his attention. There was a grace in the way she walked, the small tilt of her head as she examined him, the subtle way she held herself that hinted at both strength and a hint of vulnerability. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the sunlight, and she wore a casual elegance that suggested comfort in her own skin. She didn't need to impress, but she effortlessly did. "Hello," she said, her voice warm but measured, like a smile translated into sound. He nodded, unsure how to respond beyond the polite greeting. There was something in the way she looked at him, curious but not scrutinizing, that made his chest tighten slightly. As he knelt to inspect the broken handle, the clink of his tools against the metal was loud in the quiet room. She lingered nearby, leaning casually against the doorway, arms crossed, observing. He felt her gaze brush over him like sunlight on his skin, warm, gentle, and slightly disarming. Every movement she made seemed deliberate but effortless. Tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, stretching slightly to glance out the window, the faint creak of her boots on the wooden floor. He tried to focus on the task, but he couldn't ignore the small, subtle ways she drew his attention. The way her lips curved when she smiled softly at his fumbling with the screwdriver. The tilt of her head when she asked, casually, if he needed anything. Even the faint scent of her perfume, floral but not overpowering, seemed to hang around him long after she moved. Inside, he was aware of a strange tension building, a curious pull he didn't yet understand. He reminded himself it was just a repair job, but the way she seemed to occupy the room, not demanding, just existing, was mesmerizing. She didn't speak much, but her presence was loud in its intimacy. Meanwhile, she studied him with quiet amusement. Here was someone younger, clearly capable, yet slightly awkward in the soft domestic space she inhabited. She found herself intrigued by the contrast. Confidence tempered with sincerity, skill paired with nervous attentiveness. There was something refreshing about him, different from the people she usually encountered. By the time he finished the first few adjustments to the handle, there was a sense of mutual awareness that neither had voiced. A spark, subtle but undeniable, had ignited, grounded in curiosity, admiration, and the thrill of something new. Both sensed that this was more than just a repair job. A small, ordinary task had opened the door, not just to the home, but to a connection neither had anticipated. And in that quiet moment, the story began, not with grand gestures, but with the shared breath of proximity, the sound of tools, and the unspoken acknowledgement of each other's presence. He had just tightened the last screw on the door handle when she stepped closer, her presence filling the small space around the doorway. The late afternoon sunlight painted golden streaks across the hardwood floor, highlighting the warmth of the room. He reached for the door, expecting it to swing open easily, but it didn't. "Oh," she said softly, a teasing edge to her tone. "Looks like you're stuck." He frowned, trying the handle again. The door didn't budge. I think." She cut him off with a playful laugh, leaning slightly closer. "Now you're locked in with me." Her words hung in the air, light yet charged with a subtle energy that made his chest tighten. It was a simple joke, but in the quiet intimacy of the room, it felt layered. An invitation, a challenge, a spark of connection he wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge. He stepped back slightly, embarrassed but unable to look away. The space between them was small, just enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. As he reached for the handle again, their hands brushed accidentally. It was a fleeting touch, barely perceptible, but enough to send a jolt of awareness through him. Her fingers lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and he noticed the softness of her skin, the faint pulse at her wrist, the subtle warmth that seemed to draw him in without words. She watched him with an amused curiosity, her eyes sparkling as if she knew exactly the effect she had on him. He noticed the slight tilt of her head, the gentle arch of her brow, the way her lips curved into a small, playful smile. Every detail was amplified in his attention. He had no choice but to notice. The room was filled with quiet sounds. The click of the lock, the scrape of the hinge, the soft rustle of her clothing as she shifted her weight. Yet amid these mundane noises, a tension lingered. A slow, electric thread connecting them, invisible but undeniable. He swallowed, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. "I think I can," he began, but she interrupted, stepping even closer. "Or," she said, voice low, teasing, "you could just stay here a little longer." Her nearness made his heart race. He felt the subtle brush of her sleeve against his arm, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the warm air. It was intoxicating, not in a way that demanded anything inappropriate, but in a way that made the ordinary moment feel suspended in time. He laughed nervously, his voice betraying his surprise at how affected he was. "I guess I'll make the best of being locked in, then." She smiled wider, the warmth in her gaze softening into something more intimate. No words were needed beyond that small exchange. The playful tension had spoken for itself. It was a moment of closeness, a gentle spark of connection, a subtle promise that the ordinary could turn extraordinary with the right company. As he finally managed to swing the door open, the air between them remained charged. They both knew, without saying a word, that something had shifted. A simple repair had transformed into a delicate dance of proximity, playful teasing, and the first brush of unspoken desire. And neither was in a rush to break the spell. After the playful, locked-in moment, the air between them softened, tinged with curiosity and an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. He gathered his tools, but she motioned toward the living room. "Why don't you sit for a moment? I'll make us some tea." He hesitated, slightly awkward, but the warmth in her tone made him relax. The living room was cozy, a gentle reflection of her personality. A well-worn couch, cushions arranged with care, books stacked in quiet corners, and the soft hum of a ceiling fan stirring the late afternoon light. There was an intimacy in the space, subtle yet inviting, that made him feel both welcome and observed. As she prepared the tea, he couldn't help noticing her movements. The ease in the way she poured hot water into delicate cups, the slight arch of her neck as she reached for a teapot, the casual grace with which she folded her hair behind one ear. She was confident, yes, but not impervious. There was a softness to her, a quiet vulnerability she didn't hide, and it drew him in like a current he didn't resist. He sat down, fumbling slightly with the cushion. She placed a steaming cup in front of him, and their fingers brushed as she set it on the table. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it left a lingering warmth in his palm. He noticed the faint scent of her perfume, the faint warmth of her touch, and the way her eyes met his, not just casually, but with an awareness that made his chest tighten. They settled into conversation, tentative at first about trivial things. The weather, a shared memory from a recent neighborhood event, but it gradually deepened. She spoke of her life with honesty, revealing moments of loneliness, of resilience, of quiet victories that shaped her. He listened attentively, offering small observations, and gradually, he found himself sharing bits of his own story. Ambitions, fears, and the uncertainty of navigating a life that sometimes felt too vast for his own experience. Their dialogue wasn't dramatic or forced. It was a gentle unfolding of selves, Laughter came easily, not from jokes alone, but from the delight of mutual understanding. Every pause, every smile, every shared glance felt meaningful. The distance between them shrank in small, almost imperceptible ways. Knees nearly touching under the table, shoulders brushing as they leaned forward to hear each other better. He noticed the subtle cues she didn't voice outright. The way she leaned slightly toward him when she spoke, the softness in her gaze, the careful attention to his words. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense. It was an invitation into her world, a signal that she found him trustworthy, present, and worth her attention. And he, in turn, responded with sincerity, listening without judgment, laughing without pretense, and occasionally letting his hand linger on the edge of the cup as if staying near her warmth made the moment richer. The room seemed to hold its breath around them, every sound, the soft clink of the teacups, the rustle of fabric, the faint creak of floorboards, amplifying the intimacy of the shared space. By the time the tea was finished, a quiet understanding had formed between them. This was no longer just a repair job, no longer just casual company. They had entered a delicate territory of emotional closeness, an awareness of each other's presence, a recognition of unspoken longing, and a shared appreciation for the simplicity of being truly seen. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long amber streaks across the living room. He was helping her reach a high shelf, retrieving a small stack of books she had been struggling with. The proximity between them was immediate. His arm brushing hers, the shared effort making their bodies lean into the same space. Neither pulled away, and the room seemed to shrink around the two of them, the rest of the world fading into the background. Their hands lingered on the books for a moment longer than necessary. The casual task had become a silent negotiation of space, a dance neither had rehearsed. He felt the subtle warmth of her hand against his, the softness of her skin, the delicate pressure of her grip as their fingers adjusted on the edge of a book. She, in turn, seemed acutely aware of the contact, the quiet thrum of closeness sending a faint flush to her cheeks. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, not uncomfortable, but charged. Every small movement, her shifting weight, the brush of her sleeve against his arm, the slight inhale she took, carried significance. He caught himself noticing details he hadn't before. The curve of her neck when she turned to glance at the window, the soft gleam in her eyes as they met his, the way her hair fell over her shoulder in a casual cascade. It wasn't lust or impulsive attraction. It was the careful noticing of someone you're slowly drawn to, the way ordinary gestures suddenly feel electric. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt clumsy, insufficient. Instead, he let his gaze linger, subtly communicating attention without overstepping. She mirrored him, allowing a pause, letting her eyes convey the curiosity and quiet tension neither dared to voice. The air between them seemed almost tactile, as if the space itself were aware of the unspoken connection. In that suspended moment, he became intensely aware of her vulnerability, the small hesitations in her posture that suggested caution beneath her confident exterior. It made him ache to respect her boundaries while feeling an inexplicable pull closer. She noticed his attentiveness, the gentle concern in his posture, and it softened her teasing exterior. For a fleeting second, the walls each had built seemed less necessary. A subtle sound, a soft creak of the floorboard, the distant hum of traffic outside, amplified the intimacy of the shared space. Their breathing, unremarkable in isolation, felt synchronized in this suspended tension. It was a moment of quiet surrender to presence, a recognition that desire could exist without words, without rushing, simply in awareness and touch. Finally, he adjusted his stance to hand her the last book. Their fingers touched again briefly, lightly, intentionally unhurried. A shiver of anticipation passed between them, unspoken yet profoundly understood. It wasn't a moment of crossing boundaries. It was a moment of acknowledgement, a mutual admission that something deeper was beginning, an invisible thread of attraction stretching between them. As he stepped back, giving her a careful, respectful distance, the room felt charged yet calm. The tension remained, lingering like the faint scent of her perfume, a reminder that this connection was real, delicate, and slowly unfolding. Both knew that the spark had been lit, they just hadn't yet named the fire. The afternoon had softened into early evening, and the room glowed in the mellow light filtering through the curtains. He found himself sitting beside her on the couch, an unspoken permission to linger in her space settling between them. The air was warm, tinged with the faint aroma of tea and something deeper, more personal, her subtle perfume mingling with the scent of the old wooden furniture. She leaned back, eyes tracing the lines of the room, then finally meeting his gaze. "It's been quiet lately," she said softly. Her voice wasn't sad, exactly, but it carried a weight of unspoken loneliness. "I sometimes forget how that feels, how rare it is to have someone really listen." He nodded, sensing the invitation behind her words. "I'm listening," he said simply, and it wasn't a cliché, it was a deliberate truth. He tilted his body slightly toward hers, not intrusively, but enough that the warmth of his presence seemed to offer quiet reassurance. She took a small breath and began to share, small fragments of her life that she usually kept guarded. A memory of a friend who moved away, a moment of regret she hadn't voiced to anyone, the subtle ache of missed opportunities. She spoke with the sort of honesty reserved for those rare, fleeting moments when trust is instinctive rather than earned. He listened, genuinely captivated, not because he wanted to offer solutions, but because he wanted to understand her world. Occasionally, he would offer a thought or observation, a careful reflection that acknowledged her experiences without judgment. When she paused, he didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he let the space between them breathe, letting her feel the weight of being truly seen. Their physical closeness mirrored their emotional connection. His hand rested lightly on the arm of the couch near hers, close enough that their warmth seemed to mingle without intentional touch. She adjusted her posture slightly, leaning toward him, not fully, but just enough to signal comfort in his presence. The gentle brush of her sleeve against his arm, the tilt of her head toward him, the softness of her eyes, all became threads weaving an invisible bond. He found himself noticing details, the subtle cadence of her voice, the way her lips pressed together when she thought deeply, the small gestures that revealed her personality, her quiet strength, her layered vulnerability. And she, in turn, noticed how attentively he listened, the way he shifted slightly to accommodate her words, the occasional faint smile that let her know she wasn't alone. It was a conversation without judgment, without pressure, yet it carried profound intimacy. In that moment, they weren't defined by age, by life experience, or by societal expectations. They were simply two people recognizing a rare and delicate connection. When the tea had long since cooled and the room fell into gentle shadows, they lingered, neither eager to break the shared quiet. That afternoon had built something fragile but enduring. A bridge of trust, a safe space for vulnerability, and the first real acknowledgement that this connection might be more than coincidence. As he finally stood to leave, he felt it. A subtle reluctance to go, mirrored in her slight pause and the way she watched him from the doorway. Neither needed words to understand. They had begun to open themselves to each other, and the emotional thread between them was growing stronger, slower, and entirely unspoken. The evening had settled fully, and the warm glow from a single lamp cast soft shadows across the kitchen as they prepared a small snack together. The quiet intimacy of shared tasks created a rhythm neither had planned, yet both fell into naturally. He reached for the butter while she sliced bread, their hands brushing more than once. Each accidental touch carried weight now, an electric charge that lingered longer than the brief contact warranted. Neither of them spoke of it. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, they communicated through glances and subtle gestures. The way she adjusted her posture slightly to stay close, the faint smile that lingered at the corners of her lips, the way he leaned just a fraction nearer as he handed her a plate. Every movement was deliberate, yet effortless, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between them for days. She paused, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and he found himself noticing it again. How soft it looked in the lamp's warm light, how it framed her face, how it made the small act of watching her feel intimate. He caught himself holding her gaze a moment too long, and she didn't look away. Instead, her eyes softened, reflecting both curiosity and a quiet invitation. The small kitchen became their universe, filled with mundane sounds made extraordinary by the proximity and attention they gave one another. The clink of a knife against a cutting board, the gentle hiss of the kettle, the subtle rustle of clothing as they shifted closer together. Even these ordinary noises seemed amplified in the quiet intimacy of the moment, each one punctuating the tension that neither dared to name aloud. He found himself wishing the moment would linger indefinitely. The warmth of her presence, the subtle fragrance of her perfume mingling with the smell of bread and tea, the faint brush of her sleeve against his arm. It all combined into a heady awareness he couldn't ignore. He wanted to say something, but he knew the magic lay in the unspoken. Desire, he realized, didn't always need words. Sometimes, it was in the shared silence, the slow, deliberate touches, the mirrored movements, and the electric pull of proximity. She, too, seemed acutely aware of the invisible thread connecting them. There was no overt flirting, no teasing banter this time, just a mutual recognition that they had moved beyond casual curiosity. She allowed him closer space than she normally would, subtle shifts of body language that mirrored his own. And in doing so, she acknowledged the connection they shared without risking the fragile respect and warmth that had grown between them. Finally, he reached to hand her a small plate of food, and their fingers lingered, palm against palm, long enough that a small shiver ran through both of them. The look they exchanged held more meaning than any words could convey. An understanding that something was developing, delicate but undeniable, thrilling but safe, a tension that could grow without needing to be acted upon immediately. As they leaned back slightly to sip their tea, the moment crystallized in quiet satisfaction. Both knew the tension between them had been acknowledged, and neither wanted to break it prematurely. Silent desire had found its first home in subtle touches, glances, and shared spaces, leaving them poised for the next step, when honesty and emotion might finally catch up with what their hearts had already recognized. The room was bathed in the gentle glow of early evening, the sun having surrendered fully to twilight. He lingered by the doorway, gathering the last of his tools, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to break the quiet spell that had stretched between them over the past hours. The laughter, the shared confidences, the subtle touches, they had all built to this point, an unspoken understanding that something real had begun. She approached him, moving with that effortless grace that had captivated him from the start. Her eyes met his, warm and clear, and for a moment, words felt unnecessary. The connection between them was palpable, a delicate thread that had grown strong enough to hold the weight of acknowledgement. I'm glad you stayed," she said softly, her voice carrying both humor and something more tender beneath it. He smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation and relief mingled together. "I'm glad I did too," he replied, stepping just a fraction closer. The warmth of her presence seemed to pull him in, yet there was no rush, no need to force the moment. It was enough to simply be there, to share space and breath and understanding. They moved naturally toward the living room couch, guided by the comfort of shared proximity rather than conscious decision. Sitting side by side, he felt the subtle warmth radiating from her, the softness of her hair brushing against his shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume filling the air. She rested her hand lightly near his on the armrest, a simple gesture heavy with meaning. The conversation that followed was quiet, sincere, and full of laughter tinged with vulnerability. They spoke of hopes, of fears, of the strange, delicate way their worlds had collided. Each word was an affirmation of connection, a gentle weaving of lives that had begun tentatively but now felt inevitable. Then, without preamble, she leaned slightly closer, resting her head near his shoulder. It was a small act, intimate yet respectful, and he responded by gently placing his arm behind her, offering quiet security. The embrace was neither rushed nor exaggerated. It was the perfect balance of warmth and understanding, a tactile acknowledgement of everything they had shared. They stayed like that for a long moment, letting the silence speak volumes. Every brush of her hand, every slight shift of her body, every quiet inhale and exhale was charged with mutual recognition. The age difference, the hesitation, the world outside, none of it mattered. In that space, they had found each other fully, without pretense or expectation. As he finally spoke, his voice low and sincere, it carried the weight of everything unspoken before. "I've never felt seen like this before," he said. Her smile softened, and she squeezed his hand gently. "Neither have I," she replied, "and I don't want to forget it." The room seemed to exhale with them, the tension of the slow-burn romance melting into calm certainty. They had traversed curiosity, playful teasing, shared vulnerabilities, and silent desire. Now the connection was real, grounded, and secure. As the evening deepened into night, they stayed together, side by side, hearts aligned in quiet understanding. There was no need for grand declarations, no rush to define every feeling. Theirs was a bond forged slowly, tenderly, and with respect, a connection that promised warmth, trust, and the possibility of a shared future. And in that simple, unassuming way, they were together and secure, each silently grateful for the moment they had finally allowed themselves to share. If you felt the spark between them, hit the like button and subscribe for more slow-burn romance stories. Share your favorite moment in the comments. Do you think age really is just a number when it comes to love? Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that warms the heart.